Right, good afternoon and welcome to the first day of NATSO Live. My name is Amy Toner and I'm NATSO's Vice President, Publishing and Digital Content. I choose education at NATSO and I'm so excited about this week. Before we get to the notes, I'm going to pass it over to Pamela Hayes. She's going to thank all our great sponsors.
Thank you, Amy. And I too am excited to offer a week of education. And we could not make this possible unless we had some sponsors to support us in the industry. So it's my honor to introduce you to our sponsors. Our title sponsors are CatScale and Federated Insurance. And it's, again, my pleasure to tell you a little bit about them. CatScale has more than 1,800 locations across the US and Canada. And there are no startup costs, and equipment, maintenance, and training are provided. Professional drivers look for CatScale, so you want to be sure you have one at your location, and you can visit their website to get more information. Federated Insurance is our other title sponsor. Their marketing representatives will make sure that your operators have peace of mind with major client service standards. At Federated, it's their business to protect yours. Successful operators need to know what their insurance agent knows about the travel plaza business and should feel good that they have the correct and specific coverage. Please feel free to learn more about Federated Insurance at federatedinsurance.com. And also, as you can see, the DAS logo is behind most of our backgrounds. DAS Companies is a full service marketing and supply chain portfolio. They are privately held and they work in the design, import, and distribution of truck and auto supplies, travel gear, and mobile electronics that offer safety, convenience, comfort, and connectedness to the on-the-go consumer. They will work with a lot of series of partnerships, including travel centers, government, convenience stores, heavy-duty trucking, grocery and electronics, and specialty retailers. So again, my honor and privilege to welcome all the sponsors to this event. Back to you, Amy.
Thanks, Pamela. Pamela's my partner in crime. We're bringing it together for you guys. Okay, so just a few reminders. Please keep your lines muted. We're going to do the presentation, and then after that, we'll take questions. So please drop them in the chat at any time. And just know that at the end that we'll take them, but keep your lines muted for now. So it's in the chat at the bottom. After the presentation is over, our own Christine Schessler, NATSO COO, will be the moderator. She has some great questions already written, but she also wants yours. So make sure you drop them in to the comments. Okay, now it's my pleasure to turn it over to Nate.
Good everyone, and I hope everybody's having a good Monday. Federated is proud to indeed sponsor any education that has to do with operators' best practices. We've been a supporter and chairman's partner of NATSO for 10 years now, and we believe in the importance of training and education along management in all lines of your operation. So as a matter of fact, as this year, I think one of the key words is all operators have been pivoting. Federated is pivoting as well, and we're proud to just come out now with some classes we used to do at our corporate headquarters only twice a year, once in April and once in September. We call it our Risk Management Academy, and we would invite petroleum marketers and travel plaza owners and convenience store operators to come and learn what we learned from our clients about where claims and where lawsuits come from affecting their business. But more so, not just where it comes from, but what you can do from an operational best practices standpoint to avoid these situations. And so when we decided earlier in the year that it wasn't practical maybe for everybody to have that kind of business travel just because they're stretched in their operations with personnel and otherwise, we decided to take our 2 shows that we do in-house on the road this year. And we're doing it in a one-day format in 11 cities that you can see outlined there, beginning this week in Orlando on Thursday, and then we go to Kansas City after that, Sacramento, and so on, and we'll end up in Eastern Pennsylvania in early December, where we're taking what we know out to petroleum marketers, convenience store, and travel plaza operators from in a socially distanced venue, starting at about 9 in the morning and getting done about 3 in the afternoon, so that I know we're not in all parts of the country, we're just in these 11 markets. But next year, if this goes well, we'll evolve it to 11 different cities. So hope for those of you who are near one of these cities, I want you to know that Your membership in NATSO allows you to attend this training and get the information for no charge as a benefit of our partnership. So for any questions, please feel free to email me. And I think we'll also put the registration for these seminars or these classes into the chat as well. So anyway, I am super excited to announce the presenter today, Jason Lauritsen. Jason, I got your name right, hopefully. Lauritsen is performing management as the keynote speaker, trainer, and author. Jason liberates managers from outdated and inhumane practices so he can cultivate on their human potential and work to improve people's lives. He's known for his authentic and vulnerable storytelling that challenges you to see things differently. Jason's experiences range from startup CEO to Fortune 1000 executive. He's done a lot. And he spent several years leading best practices at work from an HR technology company where he gained deep insight into really some of the best workplaces in the whole entire world. Jason is also the author of 2 books. The first one, Unlocking High Performance and How to Use Performance Management to Engage and Empower Employees to Their Full Potential. And the other, Social Gravity, Harnessing the Natural Laws of Relationships. Very interesting. And Jason, welcome. We're excited to hear more.
Good afternoon. I am thrilled to be here with you today. My goal today over the next 30 minutes or so is to help you gain maybe a different perspective or a new way of thinking about the experience we create for employees so that you can do a better job of attracting and retaining and engaging your people. Now, I believe that that starts very fundamentally with recognizing that one of our most powerful drives as human beings is for a connection and relationship with other human beings. I mean, that's what's made the last year and a half, I think, so hard on so many of us, is that we couldn't see or be with the people that matter most to us in the ways that we wanted to. Even for those of us that, or those of you that were working, in locations where you never got to work from home, you were working out with people, you still were at a distance, we were removed, we had barriers between us, and that took a toll. When we can't get that connection, when we can't be in that relationship, that has a toll on us. And this powerful drive for relationship and connection comes with us when we show up to work as employees. It's powerful in all parts of our lives, but it's very powerful at work as well. And this really became clear for me in a part of my career that I have to tell you a little bit more about. I spent 3 years leading the Best Places to Work team for a company called Quantum Workplace. And Quantum Workplace is a technology company. One of the things that the company offers as a solution is an employee survey platform. And we use that survey platform to be the research engine behind, at the time, it was almost 50 different Best Places to Work programs across the United States. So we collected literally hundreds of thousands of employee survey responses each year to measure their satisfaction with their work and their engagement with their employer. And at the end of each year, we would do a big analysis of all that data to see what kinds of trends were there and what things were most powerfully driving satisfaction and engagement across all businesses, across all industries, locations. And what I started to realize after several years of doing this was that every year on this list, there were, while there were some things that sort of came on the list and left, depending on what was happening in the broader, work environment or economy, there were some things that were always on those lists. There were some consistent things that were always there. And they were things like this. They were things like, I want to feel valued. I need to trust the people I work with and feel like I am trusted. I want to be cared for and appreciated. And maybe those aren't all that surprising to you if you reflect on your own work experience, or if you've done employee surveys in your organization. You've probably seen these things. You know how important they are to driving satisfaction and engagement. But what struck me is that when you step back and you look at these things, if you take them out of the context of how I got these, if these are employee survey feedback, and you just think about those 4 things by themselves, if you wrote them down on a sheet of paper, it wouldn't be obvious that we're talking about work. It actually sounds a lot more like we're talking about a relationship. And that is sort of what really struck me about this. What I began to realize was that for employees, they don't experience work in the way we think they do. They actually experience work more like a relationship than anything else. Now, if you think about, one of the most important relationships in your life outside of work, so let's say your spouse, significant other, best friend, anyone who you're really close with, if you think about that relationship and what that relationship sort of gives to you, or what you get from that relationship, or how you would describe that relationship, you would probably write down some things much like, what was on that previous slide. You feel valued in that relationship. There's trust, that that person cares about you and for you, and you care about them. They appreciate you, right? And so I think what we learn is that we as employees have the same expectations of work that we have of any other significant relationship in our life. And work is certainly a big, important relationship when you consider how much time we spend there, how much of our identity is wrapped up in our work. And I think when we recognize that work is this important relationship for employees, it starts to help us understand why we've traditionally had such a tough time engaging and retaining people. And that's fundamentally that we still, as employers, largely think of work as a contract with the employee, right? We provide, as an employer, we provide pay and benefits in exchange for the employee's time and work product. And, that has worked in some contexts. And actually, we have whole HR and management systems built around that are designed to essentially make sure that we're enforcing that contract, that we're getting our money's worth as an employer. If you think about, that's why we have performance appraisals and job descriptions and performance improvement plans and policy manuals. It's all oriented towards contract enforcement. And like I said, that's work to some degree, but here's the problem, is that that's a really terrible way to go about relationship building, right? You've got, and think about being in a marriage like that, where your spouse rarely ever tells you or shows you that they love you, but frequently reminds you of how well you are, or likely are not, meeting your marital obligations. And if I just described your marriage, I apologize. I didn't want to bring up a sore subject, because this is not a recipe for a happy, long-lasting relationship or marriage. It is a recipe for divorce, for, dissatisfaction, disenchantment. And this, sadly, is the reality for so many employees. They show up to work looking for a healthy relationship, wanting to feel cared about and appreciated and trusted, and they're met with, "What have you done for me lately?" And so it shouldn't be all that surprising when our employees are leaving us, moving on to, look for a better work relationship where they're treated better, where they feel like they're cared about more. And so if we are going to create the kind of workplace that people want to work for, that people will stay at long-term, where they'll do their best work, it's really about moving beyond this contractual way of thinking. We have to break free of this and start to understand and treat work more like a relationship. And that's what I'm here to talk with you about today. Over the next 20 or so minutes, I'm going to help you sort of think differently about work through the lens of a relationship. And the good news is we don't have to recreate the wheel here. There are, years, decades of research and study that's been done on relationships, and there's models that have been created to help us understand what ingredients are required to make a healthy, positive relationship work. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take one of those models and we're going to apply that to the work relationship to help you start thinking about what this might look like, what it might feel like, and what it calls on us to do as leaders and as managers in our organization if we want to create an experience that feels like a relationship for the employee, feels like a good relationship, and invites them to stick around and do their best work. So let's start with, I'll break this down. I'm going to talk about each of these a little bit, tell you a little bit about what they are, and then tell you sort of how to go and put them into action. And we're going to go through a lot pretty quickly. We're going to follow this up with a Q&A. So anything you want to go deeper in, we will go deeper in the Q&A. But for now, I'm going to try to give you a bunch of information pretty quickly. So our model starts with the first ingredient of a healthy relationship is appreciation. All of us crave to be acknowledged and validated, by other people. We want to feel seen and valued by the people that we spend time with. And that's appreciation. And I think if we're really honest about this in our personal lives, we're not very good at this. We're not good at expressing appreciation, even to those that we care the most about in our lives. And so it's no surprise that we are not very good at this at work. And this isn't a new problem. In fact, there was a book written almost 20 years ago called How Full is Your Bucket that you may have heard about. It was written by the folks at the Gallup organization based on data that they had that showed that 65% of the millions of employees that they had surveyed were saying that they had received 0 moments of positive recognition in the previous year at work. Let me say that again. 2/3 of the employees they surveyed said they had received exactly zero, none, zilch moments of positive recognition in the previous year. That seems almost impossible. It seems really unlikely, but I actually think it's a lot more likely and plausible than you think. And let me explain it this way. If you were to take all of your employees in your organization, right, all of them, and chart them out on a graph based on performance level, you'd get something like what you're looking at here in this slide. It would be a standard deviation where you have some high performers, some low performers, but most people are right around the middle. They're average performers. They show up to work every day. They do their job, kind of meet expectations and go home. Now, the issue here is that we've been conditioned as managers to pay attention to 2 different groups of people sort of on this chart or in this distribution. If we were having a conversation, I'd ask you, and you probably can, like right now, you're thinking, oh, I know who that is. It's the high performers, because we want to make sure our top people get recognized. Obviously, that's a great practice. We want to make sure they're feeling the love. But then the other place that we spend most of our time and energy is on the low performers, right? We've been told we need to work on those low performers to either move them up or move them out. Does anybody notice the problem here? Right? A majority of our employees are in the middle, those average employees who oftentimes show up to work every day. They do their job. They do it exactly, they deliver on what they've been expected. They might be giving you their best effort to meet expectations. And then they go home at the end of the day feeling often like nobody even noticed or cared that they were there. And this is where things start to break down. And what they talk about in How Full is Your Bucket, I think, is still a really relevant solution today. And what they say is that if we go to the brain science and the psychology research, that if we understand the way our brains interpret sort of our day-to-day experiences, that we can actually notice, or we have the capacity to notice about 20,000 different individual moments each day. And these moments are either positive emotionally, they're neutral, or they're negative emotionally. And if we have a good experience or we feel good about an experience, it means that it's basically simple math. It's a ratio. We've had more positive moments to negative moments. At the end of this presentation today, you will either feel positively about it or negatively about it. And that will have to do with how many more positive moments than negative moments occur throughout the course of this hour. And so what they suggest is that if we really want if we want to make people feel better about their work relation, we want to express more appreciation, it's really about creating more positive moments. And they say the ideal is 5 to 1. We want people to be experiencing 5 positive moments to 1 negative moment every day at work, sort of on the average. And so what that says, or what that calls on us to do as leaders, as managers, is to really think about how can we manufacture more positive moments. Now, we can start with role modeling that. It can be simple things like making eye contact and smiling and saying hello to people when you see them, or seeming actually happy to see people and call them by name, or making time to just stop and check in on people. When I was a manager and I was in an office with people leading teams, one of the things I would do frequently is I just stop by people's desks and give them a quick fist bump or a high five. Now, I know sometimes we haven't been doing a lot of high fives over the last year, but hopefully we're coming back to where at least a fist bump is welcome. And when you fist bump or high five someone, they almost invariably smile. Positive moment. It can be that simple. It's saying thank you. It can be little things like that. But as a manager and leader, we have to start modeling it, and then we have to start teaching it, because like I said, this is not a natural thing for us. So ingredient number 1 in a healthy relationship is appreciation. And that's really about just create more positive moments with and for your people. Number two is acceptance. And acceptance is the best way I could explain this or illustrate is that, think about your very best friend, the person that you are closest to in the world that you would consider your BFF. Now, if I asked you to describe that person to me, I would almost guarantee that one of the things you would tell me about that person and the reason they're your best friend is that you feel like you can be completely yourself with them. They accept you fully. They've seen your good, bad, and ugly, and they accept it all. They don't try to change you. They don't judge you. They just sort of accept you for who you are. And I think that's a pretty powerful message about, if we want to create a more accepting, positive relationship at work, we have to create a work environment where we embrace people for who they really are, not who we hope they will be or who we wish they would be or who we want them to be, but we embrace them for who they are and we invite them to, bring that person to work and share that with, their coworkers, with your customers. So the more we can create that kind of environment where people feel like they are accepted and welcome to show up as they are, the more likely they are to feel like they're in a positive relationship. And so how do we do this? Well, we could talk, this is really getting into inclusion and a whole bunch of other things that are a lot more detailed we could spend a whole day on. But one of the really simple things we can do is that we need to make sure that people feel connected from the very first day. I remember very distinctly, I had a sales job many, many moons ago where it was a phone sales job and the environment was really dysfunctional. But the one thing that the management there did really well is they created space for us to socialize and get to know each other. And so it was easy to make friends at the office. And so the people you worked with started to become friends. And so you felt like you were showing up, even though the work environment was bad, the work we were doing was hard and miserable often. We weren't treated very well, but we were working with our friends and that made it work. And it made us stay often much longer than we probably should have, which allowed us to actually perform better than we would have otherwise. And so finding ways to connect people early on is really powerful. In the onboarding process, make sure you're introducing people and giving them time to get to know people. One of the best practices here is, I think, assigning a social mentor maybe to a new person. Somebody that's been around a while who can kind of keep an eye out for them and make sure they meet people and get introduced and they don't get kind of lost in the shuffle and feel like they're disconnected. So acceptance is the second ingredient of a healthy relationship. The third is communication. Hopefully this is no surprise to any of you that communication is important to relationships. If it is a surprise, well, then this is a big day for you because you'll be able to start improving every relationship you have by starting to improve communication. Communication is critically important to engagement and satisfaction at work. We know this. I've been doing employee surveys or analyzing and presenting results from employee surveys to leaders and executives for years, and I have never, ever seen a survey data from a company where the employees were saying, yeah, could you back off on the communication, please? Like we got it. Like there's always a need for more communication. It's hard to get it right. And here's why it's hard. I would share a quick story. If you have like I do, younger children who are still in school, I want you to imagine what your reaction would be to this scenario. So let's assume that, at the break after this presentation is over, you have a voicemail from the school. If school was in session, it's the middle of the summer. So let's say it's school's in session and you have a call from the school. So you dial in, you hear a voicemail. The voicemail says something like this. It's, Mr. Lortzen, this is Mr. Rinaldi, the principal at Colton School. I need you to call me back as soon as possible. Here is my number. I look forward to hearing from you. Now, if you got that voicemail, what do you assume about that call? What do you assume happened at school? Chances are you're not immediately assuming that your child or in my case, it's Colton's, my son, that he's getting some kind of award or recognition or did something amazing. Most of the time, we immediately assume one of two things. Either they're in trouble or they got hurt or they're sick, right? Something like that. Something bad has happened. That's where our brain goes. And for those of you that don't have children, I just invite you to think about the last time that you got an email or a text from your boss or some other senior person in the organization that said something like, hey, I need to talk to you today before the end of the day. Like, what do you assume about that? you don't assume you're getting a promotion or a raise. You assume you're in trouble. You start like rewinding, like, what did I do wrong? And this is because as humans, we are all wired. Our brains do this thing that when we don't know what's happening, when we don't know the context, when we are uncertain or in doubt, we assume the worst. And this is part of our survival instinct. It's built into us. If you think about, historically, if you're out in the woods wandering through the woods by yourself in the dark, and you hear something that you don't know, a sound you don't recognize, it's probably okay to assume that's danger and get yourself to safety, right? That's what we do, and that's a good instinct generally, but we don't distinguish between the sound in the woods and the uncertain message from our boss. So we just assume the worst because we don't have to be prepared for the best. We only need to prepare ourselves for the worst. And this is fundamentally important if we're going to build better communication. And I want you to remember these 3 words. If you remember nothing else today, remember these 3 words. Uncertainty kills engagement. Uncertainty kills relationships. You know this if you've been in any relationship where you're uncertain about things or where things are at in the relationship or how people feel or what they're up to. That uncertainty breeds doubt, and it breeds all sorts of bad stuff that corrodes the relationship. That's what happens at work. When we allow uncertainty to exist, it starts to create disengagement, disenchantment, and that leads to people leaving, getting upset and moving on, looking for a better relationship. And so communication, when we're talking about communication towards creating a better relationship, the purpose of communication isn't to push information or share information. The purpose of communication is to reduce uncertainty and create clarity. That is the role. And so if you wake up every morning, or you teach your managers to wake up every morning and just think about, how can I reduce uncertainty for my team today? They will be well on their way to creating a better, more engaged team. And so how do we do that? One of the most powerful ways we can do that, and this is in any relationship, and it's particularly true at work, is if you want to reduce uncertainty, you have to know what people are uncertain about. Go ask them. Get in the habit of asking for feedback all the time. It can happen in one-on-one meetings or check-ins. It can happen in one-off conversations. It can happen in team meetings. You can do focus groups. You can do surveys. You can do all sorts of things. Ask for feedback, find out what's not working, what people are uncertain about, and then do something about it. Fix that thing for them so that they don't have to stay in that uncertainty. So that is the most powerful way to improve communication. And by the way, it also works in your marriage or your relationship with your kids, right? Ask for feedback. Ask them to tell you how you can, show up better for them or be a better father or partner or spouse or friend. And when they tell you what to do, listen and take action. So that's communication. The next ingredient or element of a healthy relationship is support. And, support really is about understanding that when we're in a relationship with someone else, a healthy relationship, we hold that other person in positive regard. We don't, so what that means is that when things go wrong, or if something happens that is out of character or doesn't feel right, we assume that, there were some tough circumstances or something weird happened. We don't immediately go to judging the person or assuming that there's some character flaw in that individual. So we assume, this sort of positive, we have positive regard for the person. And so, and I think that we assume often that we are way more supportive at work than we often are. And, one of the ways I think we can check ourselves is to think about the last time that, someone that you either work with or someone that works for you, made a mistake or screwed something up that was of consequence, of significance. What was your immediate thought or reaction to that? Now, thankfully, I'm not going to make you say that or type it or whatever, but if you're like me, I know I immediately start, going to questions like, what were they doing? Like, what were they thinking? What is wrong with them? Why did they do that? Right? We go immediately to blaming. We go, immediately to judging. We go immediately to sort of, we go to this place where we assume that they did something almost on purpose. And that is the opposite of support. What support looks like is that when those things happen is that we we treat, we would treat them more the way that we would treat our best friend. Like if something goes wrong, if we see our best friend do something really out of character or something, really dumb or looks dumb from the outside, we assume that like there must be something really bad happening. And our first instinct isn't to judge. It isn't to sort of, blame. It's to help, right? Our first instinct is to help. That's what support looks like. And so when we think about our organization, when we think about ourselves, are we holding our employees in positive regard? Do we assume that our employees have positive intentions in their work? I think most people want to do a good job and are generally trying to do a good job. Are we assuming that in how we manage them? Are we assuming that in our management practices and our policies? And so what I think, one is we need to check our own assumptions, like be aware of how we react to those situations when they happen. But I think it's also helpful to look at our own management practices and policies and how we treat people. Like, do we treat people, when you look at your policy manual or practices, does it communicate that you trust people and assume they'll do the right thing? Or does it communicate that, hey, we sort of assume people are going to screw up and try to harm us, and so we're playing defense and put policies in to make sure they don't screw up? What message are you sending there? And so that's really the checkpoint on support. The last element of a healthy relationship I'm going to talk about here is commitment. And commitment shows up in relationships in two ways. The first is that commitment requires reciprocity. And that means that that's just a fancy way of saying that I'm committed to you and you're committed to me. That I am invested in a positive, healthy relationship. I'm invested in your success and well-being. You're invested in my success and well-being. And we are willing to invest of ourselves, to sacrifice essentially for you to be successful, to be well. So reciprocity is a critical ingredient. I think sometimes we require our employees to be invested in us and in the organization, but are we always fully invested in them? And I think that's where things sometimes break down, is we need to really be checking in, understanding their needs and experiences, and be committed to helping them through that as well. But the other side of commitment is repair, because sometimes things go wrong, and they're going to go wrong at times. And repair is about what do we do when things go wrong, right? When things go a little bit off the tracks. And this became really clear to me. It became, I sort of figured this out, I guess, or sort of really became aware of the importance when I was teenaging I was parenting our son when he was a teenager. Our oldest son's 24 now, but when he was a teenager, he, like many teenagers, had a high capacity for stupid, like almost all of us do. And so he would do a lot of silly things. And I just sort of, because of this track record of doing silly things, I came to assume that almost every time he did something, that it was something silly. And so there were some times as he was getting older where something would happen and I would immediately assume that he had screwed something up or done something dumb, and I would go off the handle, fly off the handle, and I would yell at him, and then he would get irritated and storm off and go to his room. And then later I'd find out he hadn't even actually done anything wrong. In this case, he didn't do anything. Nothing was his fault. And so, I had a choice to make. If I wanted to keep that relationship healthy, I had to do something. And so I'd go and sit down and apologize to him, and tell him I'll do better in the future. And he would generally accept my apology, and then off we went. And eventually he learned to do that with me too, because teenagers tend to freak out a little bit too once in a while, without cause. And so he would apologize when that happened and realize how important repair is. Like when, and at work, think about all the little things get said, little things happen, and it's like little paper cuts. And if we're not addressing those, if we're not repairing those, a lot of times the work relationship dies the death of like 1,000 paper cuts, right? Just over time, it becomes, there's so many little injustices that the relationship is gone. And so how do we address that? Well, it's really, really important that employees have at least some regular cadence of at least a check-in, a short check-in with their manager that's scheduled, that's predictable. And in those check-ins, we're talking about how's it going? We're asking questions like, hey, is there anything that I can do to be of more support to you as a supervisor? Anything you need, anything we need to talk about? And it creates an opportunity for repair to sort of get those things out on the table that need to be talked about. When things go wrong as a manager, when you do something, apologize and move on, right? Apologize, commit to do better, and move on. So we need to be in constant repair. So there it is. That's what a model of a healthy relationship would look like in management and an organization to create a relationship with and for the employees that feels positive and healthy and keeps them coming back, keeps them staying and doing their best work. Actually, there is one more thing, one more ingredient, and it's probably something that's already on the top of your mind as a barrier perhaps, and it's time. And this is a lesson that my daughter taught me many years ago when she was 7 years old. I remember I was working on a presentation one day, and I was thinking about some things, and she happened to be walking through the room, and I said, Bailey, I said, how do you know if someone loves you? And she looked at me and she thought for a second, and she said, one of the first things she said was, well, they spend time with me. And that's when I realized that even as children, what we understand is that we have this limited resource called time. Everybody has the same amount. And what we do with our time says everything about what's important to us and what we value. And when it comes to relationships, time is the currency of relationships. You cannot build and foster relationship without an investment of time with other people. And so, this may feel inconvenient for you, but it means that as a manager, you have to make time to be with people. As a leader, you have to make time to be thinking about how to foster that relationship, and you need to figure out how to be out and build connection. And we also need to create time for employees to connect to one another. There is no shortcut. We have to find ways to use the time we have to foster those relationships. And so as I leave you, as I close this part, and we're going to get into Q&A here in a minute, I just want to leave you with this fundamental idea that if you want to transform your organization and become a talent magnet, you want to attract people better, you want to retain people better, you want to engage them to higher performance, it's about recognizing that work is not a contract for the employee. Work is a relationship. And when we start treating it that way, you will transform the experience that you create for employees, and you will start transforming what they give back to you as well. So thank you for taking this in. I hope there was something in there that can be helpful. I'm looking forward to fielding your questions. If you would like to get in touch with me, here's how you can do it. I do publish a new blog or video almost weekly on my website. If you visit my website and sign up, you can sign up for my newsletter, and I'll send that right to your email box for free each week. It's a way to get some additional training and insights like this to help you do this work of engaging and retaining your people. So I look forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you, Jason, for that presentation and for being here with us for the Q&A. And once again, thank you to our sponsors who are making the great content happen this week. Federated Insurance and CatScale, who are our title sponsors all summer long, as well as McLean and DAS, who are supporting this week's content. I'm Christine Schessler with NATSO, and as Amy said, I'll moderate today. I do encourage everyone to please keep posting questions in the chat. Otherwise, I have a list of questions here, and I will monopolize all of Jason's time. But we will try to get the questions in the chat in too. But I think I'm safe, Jason, in diving into this first question, that the challenge that's on so many of our members' minds, like all retailers, like restaurateurs, is the immediate challenge of recruiting. So how does anyone who's listening to your presentation today take what you've talked about retaining those great employees? Is there any way to use that as a competitive advantage to get people in the door for interviews?
It's a great question and a complicated question, obviously. I mean, this is the question, the $1 million question that everyone's trying to answer right now, I think. I think there's a couple of things that I would share. And I spent the first part of my HR career. I spent 10 years as a corporate HR leader, and the first half of that was leading talent acquisition teams. So a lot of that. So I lived in recruiting, and I was a recruiter starting my career. So this is near and dear to my heart. And I think the first answer is probably not the one that everybody wants to hear, because it's not an immediate thing. But if you start creating an environment where people feel like they're treated, where they're treated really well. When people feel like they're treated well, they feel like the company takes care of them, they feel like they're in this positive relationship, then they also talk about work a lot more. They start encouraging other people to apply. Like I watched this happen at a gathering at my house. My sister-in-law tried to recruit one of my son's friends to come work at her organization because she loves the place she works. It's the best place to work. It has been many times. She loves it and was trying to convince him to come apply. So I think there's some magic there, but that's not something that happens overnight. What I would say is that the one thing that I would offer, I guess, in the way to apply what I'm talking about with work as a relationship is there's this sort of thing that I teach oftentimes around this topic that I call the relationship test. And the relationship test is basically a way of thinking about like how would I approach this process if the person on the other side of it was a close friend or was someone who, I really cared about and that I knew or whatever. So if I think about recruiting, if I was trying to recruit, my best friend's child, right? This kid that I'd watched grown up and I really wanted to come to work, how would I treat them through the process? How would I approach creating that sort of, relationship language, the courtship, right? How would I try to court them in? How would I try to, make them feel like we really want to be in relationship with them? How would I start investing that way, even way before they were ever hired, so that they felt like, wow, if they treat me this way now, then I can imagine how they might treat me later. And so I think there's things that you can do in the process that are, human touch things. And I know this again goes back to, remember, time is the currency of relationship. And so we're so busy sometimes in our HR processes trying to make it a more efficient and apply technology. But think about the last time you're calling into customer service, Christina, you got stuck in one of these where you couldn't even get to a human being. Like, I just want to talk to a person to help me, and I'm stuck in this. I think our recruitment processes often feel that way. And so here we are, we're desperate to find people, and those people have to run through a labyrinth of technology and processes and hurdles. And so I think the more human we can make it, the more relational we can make it, the more we can make them feel like it's a courtship, as much as possible. And I understand you don't get many shots, but when you do get shots, when you do find those people, I don't have a magic for recruiting ads today we're going to get into, so I can't solve that problem. But once you do get somebody, treat them like you're dating. I mean, essentially that, put best foot forward, make sure they feel valued and appreciated even in that process. And I think you're more likely to at least close those deals, get them to want to work for you.
Or stay once they've got the interview, choose you. I think the other thing that, I've heard from some of our members, and I've seen it too. One of the great things about working at NATSO is that not only do we see some of the same people year after year at our convention, which means they've stayed employed, but we'll see them bringing their kids who've then become adult employees. So I do think a lot of our members in this industry have, you rely on them, they're going to be your employees for your life. Certainly in retail, there's that other group of folks who come in and out because that's the nature of retail. And however, I keep seeing in the news, the Washington Post reported that something like 650,000 retail employees left the workforce in April. And then Zipline did a survey after that in May that said 42% of retail workers said that they plan to leave the workforce. So while so many people just for survival are focusing on recruitment, are some of our assumptions about our long-term employees about to get tested?
Well, I think so. I'm going to tread very lightly on a couple of topics here because I know they're really big, complicated topics. But I think, regardless of how you feel about the stimulus programs and all of that happened, I think and I think there's a fair amount of research that's starting to show that, like, one of the things it did is it shifted employee consciousness about compensation and quality of life and quality of their job and how they're treated. And they just had a lot, they started asking different questions. And so I do think that there's some compensation things that are going on that are complicating things. And I think that's certainly causing some issues. And I know that that's a complicated issue to solve for people. And so I'm not going to wade into those treacherous waters today. But I do think that if, like, right now is the time to be out talking with your people and having real honest conversations, just saying, listen, we know, like, because this is the biggest mistake I see leaders, I see organizations fall into all the time, is like, well, we don't want to bring that up. We don't want to go talk about it because then, like, what's going to happen? It's like, well, guess what? It's already happening. Your employees are talking about it. They're thinking about leaving. And guess after they leave is too late. Have the conversation now. Sit down, start scheduling some focus groups or do some surveys, get out with people and say, listen, we know we're seeing this. Here's what we're seeing. We know you're probably hearing all sorts of things, whatever. Like, what can we do? What are you worried about? What can we do? What can we do and find out what the issues are? It's kind of back to that communication. Like, what are they uncertain about? What are they struggling with? And then that is your number one issue. Like, fix it if you can. If you can't fix it, explain why you can't fix it and see if you can find another way to compensate. But don't be afraid to open the conversation because it's happening. You're either going to participate in it or not. And so get out there and get with your people and talk to them. I think that's probably the best thing you could be doing right now.
And I wonder, there are so many generations in the workforce, and not everybody right now who's necessarily saying they might leave retail is going to another career. Some might be just like, I've had it with COVID. I'm retiring. I'm done.
Yeah.
But we've got the boomers, we've got the Xers like me, Gen Z now, because that teenage workforce is so important to shoring up the gap, and of course the millennials. Does your approach work equally well with all of those different generations, or do you need to adapt in any way?
So I would say, so it's kind of like it's what I went through today is the fundamentals. So they're the fundamentals. So there's fundamentals of appreciation, there's fundamentals of communication, but we could go like, let's take appreciation, for example. Like, even within appreciation, different people like to be appreciated in different ways. And so, and this has nothing to do with my age. It has to do with just me as a human being. I am an extrovert. So like when you want to appreciate me, I want you to put me up on a pedestal and talk about how great I am to everybody else. I appreciate your email telling me I did a great job, but I'd rather you go out, post it on social. Like, that's what makes me feel good because I want everybody else to know. But then I've also had people that are introverts that I put them up in front of the whole team and talk about how great they are, and they come back next time and say, if you ever do that to me again, I'm going to quit. Like, they want the emails. The individual emails are what they want, or they want me to sit down and talk to them one-on-one or whatever. So like, that's just individual human beings. And then you layer in ages and preferences. I tend not to be particularly I tend not to help tell organizations or managers to over pivot towards generations, because I think sometimes when we go to generational stuff, we tend to start stereotyping and putting people in buckets. And I think that can get you in trouble. What I would say is, like, just recognize that every human being is unique. Every person you manage, every person on your team has unique preferences. We're like, as humans, we're different. Like, I Skype with my 90-plus-year-old grandma all the time. She can run technology just fine. We Skype all the time. Don't tell me that, like, age, you can't figure out tech. Like, and so there's all these, like, different people are different ways. I also know people in their 40s. I had to fire an accountant once because he couldn't figure out how to do stuff over email. Like, technology wasn't his thing. And he wasn't old. And so it's not a generational thing. It's a unique human thing. And so I think the key is, you have to understand your team. You have to understand your people and adapt to them. That is the job of management. And it's hard sometimes. It's not, we've tried to make management easy. We've tried to make management like we're managing robots that are all exactly the same. And it just has never been true. And the more you tune into the individual, the better off you're going to be.
I just a heads up to folks that if they have questions, get them in. I think we've got a few more minutes left. One thing that I'd really like you to talk about, Jason, you talked about time being the currency of relationships. So I know that on one hand, and then on the other hand, I saw a blog post that you wrote that you and I talked about a little, which I loved, called "Sending My Kids Back to School Broke Me." And I wonder if you could share for everybody a little bit about that and what it taught you about how to decide between allocating time to yourself and the people around you.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Thank you for that, because I think honestly, and this is one of the lessons I keep having to learn. I'm a slow learner, so I have to be reminded of this over. It's why I like to teach it, because it reminds me to do these things. But what we do with our time, how we invest our time, has everything to do. I mean, I think is at the heart usually of most of our challenges. And what happened, the short version of that post, or what my story was, when COVID hit, like many people, I went into warrior mode. I'm like, okay, no problem. It's disruption. I can figure this out. I can do it. And I just started grinding. And I was scared, and I was, like my business, you think about like my business is speaking and traveling and whatever. Like I thought my business was falling apart, but I'm like, I'll pivot, I'll figure it out. And I just started working, and I was grinding. And there was just so much fear and uncertainty. And then when school came up and there was no clear right answer about whether to send kids back to school or not, like that was the final straw. And I realized that like I was so tired, and the joy was gone, and so many things, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. I finally realized I was burned out, and I had hit burnout. I'd run square into a wall, and I hadn't been putting the time into caring for myself. And I think, again, back to time, I had to invest time back in myself. I had to invest time in spending time with the people that mattered most to kind of refuel me. It was a reallocation of time again. But yes, I think this is another frontier that we've really met, especially for your frontline managers. Like I guarantee you, no matter what your business is, what part of the business they're managing, those frontline managers are on the verge of burnout. If they're not burnt out already, they are on the verge of burnout. And there's things you can do to try to help them along in a lot of different ways. But part of it is you got to give them time, and then you have to give them permission to invest in self-care, whatever that means for them. And you might have to force them to go on vacation, force them to take some time off to really like recharge, because we've been operating at full adrenaline for 18 months, and that's not healthy for anybody.
And I assume that those relationships in the workplace can be a way to mitigate some of that burnout, right? Like if you're dealing with all of the pressures at home with this, that maybe work or going back to work, depending on whether you're headquarters staff or store, that might be a little bit of a respite.
If you are doing the right kinds of things, if you are, well, if you visit my blog, there's a sheet you can download that helps you with how to have more sort of better check-ins. And part of the check-ins is just learning to check in on the human beings, learning to have better conversations about people's well-being and how they're doing. When the relationship I think work can be a respite, because home has been really, I mean, we're trying to juggle so many things that we never had to juggle before. And I think it's been really stressful. And I think that's another underlying, cause, honestly, for people leaving the retail and restaurant world too, is that there's just been so much trying to juggle and balance and do what I got to do, that as soon as you have an opportunity to let something go,
right,
you're going to do it, because people are tired. I think there's just a lot of, we have a lot of recovery, a lot of rest and recovery to do, I think, as a people, just broadly as a community.
And do you feel like people recognize that burnout in themselves? So if a leader is working with their managers and their managers saying, no, I'm doing good, I'm doing fine, what do you do with that? Do you just say, okay, they're grown-ups and they clearly know themselves? Or do you say, that's not possible?
Yeah, well, part of what I tend to do, or what I recommend, often is asking a little bit different questions, or the way your questions, like a lot of times when I do a webinar, if I do a webinar or webcast and I'm talking about well-being or anything like that, I'll start with like asking everybody in the audience to go to the chat and just say, let's do a check-in on a scale from 1 to 10. 10 being life is perfect, everything's great. I feel like the bionic man, that's a dated reference, sorry. I feel like Superman. And then on 1 is like, I can't do it another minute. I'm on the verge of collapse. Where are you at? And you get to so much more nuance, right? Because nobody goes, I mean, once in a while you get somebody's a 10. You're like, great. Either you're delusional or that's amazing. But most people will come in somewhere in the middle. And sometimes people will be like, honestly, today I'm a 3. And you're like, okay, talk to me about that. What's going on? How can I help? Like, is there something going on I can help with? And then you get into a more, even if I'm a 7, it's like, okay, well, is there anything I could do to get you to an 8 or a 9? And now you can start having a conversation. But when you say, how are you? And they're like, I'm fine. What are you supposed to do? Like, you say, I don't think you're fine. Now you're calling them a liar. Like there's all sorts of things in there that you don't, but use a different question. Different question gets you to a different conversation.
Great. I think we are about out of time unless anyone wants to post anything in the chat. All right, I think that we're good. Jason, thank you so much. I think that your presentation was such a great mix of high-level strategy people can use to rethink their relationships with their people, but also really good tactics that people could put into place right away to help deal with some of the situations they may be coming across and trying to resolve. So thank you very much for that. And thank you to everybody in our audience. We so appreciate your involvement with NATSO. I hope you're coming back for the rest of our sessions this week. But thank you for being a part of our NATSO community, and have a wonderful week.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, same place, same time tomorrow. We're gonna talk with PDI. Thanks, guys.
Wonderful, thank you.